Hi, Dragoon23 here with a video on weapon editing and weapon mashups. There's been updates since my last weapon video, and now you can fully edit a weapon in Outfit Studio. That means you can delete parts of a weapon mesh, make weapon mashups, or even make entire mashups of non-weapon parts like a broomstick and a troll skull, complete with blood effect meshes. The blood effect meshes will require Nifskope. I'm currently using Outfit Studio 5.4.2, Nifskope 2.0 Dev 7, and Skyrim Special Edition. So to recap on weapon editing and also the new stuff, let's say I want to make edit the Warhammer, so I'll drag it in. Now let's say I just want to delete this part. So it's just like a regular outfit. You can separate stuff out, you can delete it. I like to separate out before deleting just to make sure I have to delete the right parts I want to delete. Now, let's say I want to make this part larger. So, alright, let's say I want to export something like that for a Warhammer. So same thing, you'll export it, and because it's a Warhammer, this has both a first person and third person meshes, requires them, I mean. So that means you just make 2 copies of these and then rename them the same as the first and third person meshes. So in this case, that would be the first person mesh, and this would be the third person mesh. So in my other video, I go into more in depth on how to do all the stuff I just did very quickly, which was manipulation. So check that out if you want to see how I do those in more in depth, explain those in more in depth. So you can drop them, equip, looks fine in first and third person. And of course, attacking works just fine. Now onto weapon mashups. So first thing for weapon mashups is to figure out what type of weapon do you want to make, and then load that type of weapon first into Outfit Studio before making your mash. So let's say, for example, you want to make a Warhammer, you load up a Warhammer, a sword, you load up a sword, and so on. It's sort of like your reference layer, and we'll set up Outfit Studio to export the meshes with the right type of collisions and stuff. For example, let's say I want to make a Warhammer, except it's going to be a mashup of a skull and a broom. So I'll load up the Warhammer, and then I'll delete these blood effect meshes, since they're not needed. And then I like to set this layer, the Warhammer layer, as your reference layer, just so it makes exporting easier, so then you could just export with the shortcut Control E rather than having to highlight here and then manually export it that way. But it has nothing to do with being like a more typical outfit reference. Now see, my reference is set up, so now Outfit Studio will export whatever I load into with the Warhammer collisions. Okay, now to get those clutter items that I mentioned, so here's a troll skull and a broom. Now for your mashup, you're going to want it to be as close to as in height and width, or possibly, yeah, height and width of the reference weapon, just so that the collisions will work properly, because if you make it too large or too wide, then it'll just clip, but there will be no collisions. So let me rename these so these are easier. This is a skull. This is the jaw. This is a Okay, now for the skull. Oh, wrong way. Okay. Alright, something like that. Close enough. So let's say I want to export this. As you can see, my mesh works fine. Now, as you can see, when I'm tacking, there's no blood meshes because I haven't made them yet. So we'll go on to that next. But as you can see, everything works. You can attack in first and third person, you can drop it, and you can put on your back. Now, for the blood meshes, this does require Nifskope, so if you don't want to use Nifskope, you can stop right here. But to continue forward, so to make blood meshes are part of the mesh that you want to see covered in blood after hitting an enemy. It's made of 2 layers, the lighting and effects layer. To make them, you will make a duplicate of the mesh and delete anything you don't want covered in blood. Then you will enlarge it slightly so that it's right on top of the mesh and visible. If you don't enlarge it slightly, it would be, it will, sometimes it won't appear at all, like because the top layer will just cover it. I mean, the original mesh, you need to put it right on top, just so it's visible on top of the mesh. Otherwise, it'll just be embedded, so the blood layer might go into the original mesh and such. So to do that, let's say I just want blood on the jaws and the front of the skull, not the back of the skull. So to make this easier, I'm going to make the broom not visible. So we'll do the jaw first. So we're going to make a duplicate by right-clicking and then click duplicate, and then we'll call this jaw lighting or jaw lights. Yeah. Now to make it slightly large, you will go to Shape and Scale. Unclick Uniform XYZ because I found that changing the X to about 1.02, 1.02, 1.01, not the Y, leave the Y alone, and the Z gave the best results for me, but you can experiment to see what you like. So for me, I like to change it slightly to, I like to make the X and the Z axis slightly larger and leave the Y axis alone. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate the lighting and then let's see, where's it? Duplicate. Make this. And then we're going to do the same with the skull. I'm going to duplicate this. We call this skull lighting. Shape. Scale it. And say I don't want the back of the skull, so I'll just highlight that. Where's my mesh? Oh, there it is. In this case, since in this case so for the scaling for the X and Z, that was mostly for swords, but since in this case the skull also has quite a bit of Y, I'll just scale that out actually too. But yeah, this part is just a little experimentation to see what you like as a blood layer. Anyway, so we've got the jaws lighting. So now the skull, that's what I want to cover in blood. So I will also duplicate this and skull effects. So now that let's see. So in Outfit Studio, after this part, it still looks all the same, and that's where Nifskope's going to come in. So we're going to export this because this is all you can do for Outfit Studio part. Export that. Now in Nifskope, so here's my mesh. And here's all the layers: jaw lighting, jaw effects, skull lighting, and skull effects. So these BS lighting shader properties, basically the textures, is just what tells the game to load up a skull texture for the skull, a broom texture for the broom. If you delete those, then it will probably just appear purple or mixing textures in the game. So we're going to want to get back to that original Warhammer. So we're going to be copying and pasting the blood effect properties onto this. Now let me get it. So here's the original. As you can see, it has the two blood effects that I mentioned. So here's the lighting. and there's the effect. So what you want to do is you're going to copy these properties onto this one. But first you need to get rid of these, the original properties, because you don't want the original textures. So you're going to either right click, block, and then remove branch, or press Ctrl D. So block, and then remove branch. So now these are all going to appear in-game with no textures, and now you're going to copy and paste these properties. So for this one, this is the lighting shader property plus the alpha, so you want to copy these two properties over to the lighting ones. So here would be the lighting, so you would do that by either right-clicking, block, copy, or Control C. Click on this one, and then you go right click, block, and then paste branch, or Control V. Oops, messed up on that one. So click that, Control V. And then same for the effects. So I'm click it. So I'm going to copy and paste it right into the effects. So now the lightings both have the lighting properties, and the effects have the lighting, the effects properties. So one more step is that you can go back to each layer, and then you can change this flag right here. The one that says 524302, you're going to change that to 15. So that is a temporary effect. If it's any other number, then it'll be a permanent blood effect. So 14 is a permanent blood effect. We don't want that. We're going to change that to 15. Same with the skull lightings. And that's all you need to do for the blood layers, is you delete the original property, what was there, and then you copy and paste these properties into it so it gives it the right texture and lighting, and then you save. And also you change the flag to 15, so it's a temporary effect. If you leave it 14, you will have permanent blood effects on it. So this is for Skyrim Special Edition. The Legendary, the Old Rim version has a slightly different. It's the same concept, but it has a slightly more layers to it. I think there will be a need try data layer. You leave that alone. But for Special Edition, they got rid of that and a bunch of other stuff here, so it's a bit easier in Skyrim Special Edition. So anyway. So as you can see, the blood effects work on the top and the bottom of the jaw, and there's no blood on the back of the skull, only the front of the skull, which is exactly what I want. So I hope you found that helpful, and goodbye.